Welcome to another episode of the Forbidden Films Podcast, the podcast about the movies they won't make anymore. I'm Wayne Kramer, a writer and director.
And I'm Barry Germansky, a film producer. Today we're going to hop in a time machine and transport ourselves to the era of Ronald Wilson Reagan to revisit Paul Brickman's masterpiece, Risky Business. The year is 1983. The Cold War is still on. There hasn't been a major hot war in a while, but young men are still red-blooded and going through the trials and tribulations of simply living and growing up. Having defeated the Nazis and the Japanese imperialists almost 40 years earlier, America has over the decades grown into the greatest, most inventive, most powerful, most prosperous, and most generous superpower in human history. But you can't please everyone, and maybe you can't even please anyone completely, because even when there isn't a hot war to fight, citizens of the most developed countries on Earth, including the most developed one, will still find something or many things to complain about. And so that brings us specifically to the satirical nature of Risky Business, which I consider one of the top 4 Salingerian films of the 20th century, the others being Rebel Without a Cause, The Graduate, and American Beauty. I also consider the film one of the most original erotic films ever made, on par or almost on par with the most original masterpieces of Joseph von Sternberg, Alfred Hitchcock, Delmer Daves, and Mike Nichols. And in some cases, because the movie is subversive in ways that you wouldn't expect, it surpasses even the most original efforts of Luis Buñuel and Bernardo Bertolucci, as much as I admire those masters. In addition to everything I've just said, I also consider the film one of the most honest films ever made about sexual guilt, sexual hypocrisy, and sexual absurdity. It's a sui generis erotic satire, and it's a sui generis satire on the Kafkaesque flaws inherent in any and all educational institutions. But the movie's accomplishments don't end there. I find the film an important time capsule of a healthier time. In fact, you could say it was the healthiest time in human history. The Western world, specifically the United States, but the Western world as a whole, had never been in such robust shape. And the film is a satire on capitalism, but that's sort of almost a superficial target, both in the film and when we consider what the film is actually up to, because I think on a more elemental level, what the film is really doing is it's satirizing people's chronic dissatisfaction. And if it's not capitalism that people are going to be complaining about, it will be some other ism. So the movie basically teaches us that there's never a completely comfortable or satisfying position for most human beings to find themselves in. People will always say that the grass is greener somewhere else, and they will always have illusions or delusions of what is wrong with their place in the world. So that's just my general overview of what I think the movie does and what it does well, specifically. So Wayne, what do you think about it?
Well, I think you've finished the whole podcast. You've said everything that needs to be said about it. No, I love this movie. I've seen it many, many times. And of course, I was going to the background of it. I remember going over to a friend's house in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I must have been 17, 18, you do the math. And this is at the time when you could hire 16 millimeter prints from basically 16 millimeter rental stores. And that's the way you saw a movie in second run. These movies didn't come back to the theaters very often. And VHS was fairly new in the country. I went to this friend's house because his father had a video camera. So I remember making my own bootleg tape of Risky Business because I liked it that much, filming it off a 16 millimeter print on the wall. And the film was one of those films that I don't think was censored very much by the South African government at that time. And really the movie, while it is dripping in sexuality and sensuality, if you want, it doesn't have that much nudity outside of the first time Joel makes love to Lana. So the rest of the movie is language and attitude. But my takeaway from this movie is, and what I love about this movie is that no one in this movie is apologizing for having sex or for paying to have sex or for wanting to have sex. I find it very
No, but
refreshing.
they get punished anyway.
Well, not even that. I don't even think they get punished that much. I mean, yeah, Tom Cruise does have to give all the money back because, or should I say, Joel has to give all the money back
And look what happens to his
because,
car. Well, it's not his car, his father's car, but
yeah, but even that turns out okay. He's able
no,
to
that's true.
pay for, which brings me to the line. So, who's the U-boat commander? I love that line. I love the fact that these are red-blooded teenagers who have no problem cashing in their savings bonds to get with these hot women. And the overall attitude of the film that sex is healthy, but sex has also got a price to it. It's a
It's
commodity.
risky.
It's a commodity, and they all seem to think, except for Curtis Armstrong's character says, I don't have to pay for it. They all seem to think it's fine to pay for it. And what I love about the movie as well is it's harmless. It's a harmless fantasy. It's every high school teenager's fantasy of my parents leave town. I've got the run of the house. Now, if only I had a hot girl to come over and have sex with me. And wait a minute. I can do this. I can pay for this. Even if you take into account his aborted attempt where the first prostitute comes out and she's a transvestite. I think his character's name is Jackie, and she was sweet enough to hook him up with the Rebecca De Mornay character. So it worked out okay for Joel, even though it was pretty pricey. $300 for a night with 20-year-old Rebecca De Mornay, I think was a bargain. So yeah, the film has so much going on. It's so smart. It's very stylish. It's amazing that this was Paul Brickman's first turn at directing. And just as sad that he only ever directed one other feature, which was the Jessica Lange film Men Don't Leave, which I also like quite a lot. I think it's a very good movie.
So
I'm
do
not
I.
quite sure what happened with Paul Brickman because it feels like there was so much heat on him after Risky Business. And I think he was the guy who couldn't deal with the film industry or how executives were always trying to change his work. I think he was the one who decided, hey, maybe I'm just going to be a screenwriter. It's a very strange case. And I didn't really do that much homework. I did a little bit of research, but I could never quite get a singular answer on why Paul Brickman walked away from it all.
Well, they're conflicting stories, so there's no definitive answer. But regardless, Paul Brickman has immortalized himself in popular culture and specifically in the film medium because I think this is one of the most original films ever made. And that might sound like an exaggeration, but that's only because the movie is so deceptively simple. It's actually an extremely complex film that operates like a parable or an allegory. And so it's not making almost any of its messages in an overt way. It's not communicating anything in a way that is hitting the nail on the head. It finds roundabout ways of communicating its very deep insights into society and human nature. And it's very important to emphasize human nature here because humans have always had the burden of sex to deal with. And of course, it's fun, but it also is, to quote the title of the film, risky. And there are many risks associated with it. Don't forget, at the same time, the AIDS breakout is around that time.
Which the
So,
film does not acknowledge at all.
no, it doesn't.
But
But I mean, it's another thing just to think about when you're thinking about, well, what could be risky about sex?
but it's interesting in terms of talking about AIDS because I would describe this film as very sex positive,
Oh, it is.
meaning everybody has a healthy attitude about sex in this film, from Joel and his friends to Lana and her fellow prostitutes. Nobody feels they're being exploited on both sides of the transaction, and they all seem to be enjoying themselves. And you can see at the sex party or the pay for sex party toward the end of the movie, everybody seems to be having a really good time. And I know it's a fantasy. That's why I say it. This isn't a film trying to hold a magnifying glass up to the life and challenges of being a prostitute in the modern world of that time. It's not at all a realistic or introspective look at prostitution. It's just a fantasy of a 17-year-old, 18-year-old boy and his friends in a way.
And that's what's so honest about it, right?
Yeah.
That's what, and we today like to pretend that young men in particular are somehow not interested in sex or shouldn't be. or need to channel their energy
Or
elsewhere.
they're so
Um,
corrupted by the kind of sex that they can find on their phone, or they're so distracted by so much else. Or, and I think the bigger reason why they're not engaging in as much sex is the political correctness and the post-Me Too-ness of it all. Meaning, not that the Me Too reckoning wasn't something that was needed, it just was a super overcorrection that is crushed down on the playfulness of male female flirting or interactions. So I think, and I've seen examples of this, young males almost couldn't be bothered to take the risky business of hitting on a woman or flirting or going to the bar, or it just becomes a threat to them that if they don't handle it right in this age of social media, that the girl or the woman that they're approaching is going to smear it all out on social media, and this guy's life will be ruined because he didn't have good enough game, or his approach wasn't smart enough, or he wasn't super handsome guy that they would forgive for being kind of clumsy with their approach, or whatever that is. I think it's a scary world to navigate today because it's so policed in a way that it never was before. And sure, there were bad actors before who abused the world of dating or the pickup world or whatever that is. But I think in general, young men and boys are afraid of the landscape in terms of what it means to express sexual interest in a woman. So it really is a risky business world we're living in today versus the time of Joel, where the biggest threat to them was embarrassment or humiliation of being turned down.
but the film actually has a prophetic moment, which today has proved itself to be prophetic because the hilarious scene where the SWAT team arrives,
Yeah.
when he's with the babysitter, that's basically what maybe people today actually think is going to happen to them.
But there was the big difference that the babysitter didn't call the SWAT team, the dad did.
There you
Today,
go,
it's the babysitter calling the SWAT team from
Yeah.
inside the house.
It's true. Or a professor at some self-hating university. But the other thing that's interesting about this movie is it's a polymorphous satire. What do I mean by that? There are many entry points into its satirical realm. It's not just satirizing one thing or even anything that specifically or on the nose. It's got a playful satirical vibe. You use the word attitude. This movie has one of the most original attitudes ever seen in the medium's history, I think. It's got this sort of faux pornographic aesthetic to it, right from the opening titles, really. It could, like the music by Tangerine Dream, which is brilliant,
Yeah.
could though be, to some extent, the soundtrack of a actual porno film.
It's
And
more
so
ethereal than this wasn't
well,
the
it's more
typical
elevated than
this
that. Yeah.
wasn't the typical score you heard in 86 comedies of
No.
high school kids trying to get laid. I mean, the music is more soulful with a little bit of a postmodern new age electronic vibe to it. Even when I was listening to the director's commentary on the 4K, but it's the same commentary from the 2009 Blu-ray, Tom Cruise was very impressed with the music when he first heard it. Paul Brickman brought him into the post-production process quite a few times, and everybody thought the music was quite cutting edge and unusual for a film like this. So that really does set up the tone of the film and keeps it going throughout the film. And Tangerine Dream always does bring a kind of trippy, otherworldly quality to this film. And I think also, I know we're getting off the point here, but the character that Rebecca De Mornay plays, Lana, does not feel like the typical character that turns up in these films either. There's something very dark and soulful and complex about her character. And even she's
a master strategist on top of everything.
Right. But
she's a brilliant entrepreneur in her own right.
She is. She's very materialistic. She's very in tune with making money and understanding her place in the world and seeing these rich people who live in the suburbs and the lifestyle they have and coveting that. And she goes through the house and she's looking at the quality of the rugs and the furniture and the candlesticks and all of that. She's taking inventory of the material goods in the house, and it also makes us somewhat distrustful of her and her intentions. And it's hard to get a bead on Lana's character throughout the movie because she's very layered and her agenda with Joel always seems somewhat ambiguous. And so she
Yes.
keeps us off balance because we sense that there's a sensitive, caring side to her, but there's also this deeply, deeply cynical side to her with a dark past that she doesn't want to talk about. And even when
She's
Joel
manipulating him.
yeah, but I think Joel's also getting to some truths within her when he asks her about her brother and her upbringing, and clearly she was abused, or as she said, the stepfather or the I can't remember who it was hitting on her, and so she is somebody who's left home at an early age to fend for herself. So she's definitely a creature of the streets, but she also understands how to use her beauty and her sexuality and make that a commodity, and is lucky that she has that, because if she wasn't so attractive, she would have a tougher time being out on her own. Which is kind of a cynical thing to say, that you have to rely on your beauty to prostitute yourself to survive in this world. But I guess it does go along with the themes of the film and the time period. And she understood that the most valuable asset out there was herself, that she has a couple of years to make money from prostitution or to use prostitution as an elevation to learning more about financing and from other people. She's definitely a character who can take care of herself, and I think she's going to be fine in the end. I feel more so than Joel himself. But she's so atypical of the characters you find in these movies, whether it's the hot teenage girl that everyone wants to get with, and the protagonist of the story eventually does or charms her or this, that. She remains cynical to the end. But there's also a side of her that is attracted to Joel, and I do think she has a lot of affection for him and would probably end up being his girlfriend if she didn't live in this cold, cruel world where she knows she's probably not going to end up with Joel, who's going to go off to his Ivy League school. She has to make it on her own. But I would have loved to have seen a sequel to this movie 10 years later, because these are two of the most interesting characters in this kind of film that have ever been written.
I agree.
And I did feel the film ends in this very ambiguous place. There are two kind of different endings. I'm sure you're aware of that, the way that Paul Brickman preferred the director's cut ending versus the one that David Geffen, who was a big supporter of the film and of Brickman, but at the end he did want a more optimistic ending. I really actually, when looking at them both, I tend to side with Paul Brickman's ending, although I don't know if the execution of it gets across quite what he was intending. But then I don't like the David Geffen ending either. I don't think the dialogue is as clever as it thinks it is. I mean, the movie's brilliant, but I don't think they nailed the sort of lost, outgoing sequence of this film. I think there could have been something much smarter and much more thoughtful that actually satisfied everybody.
Well, the final race to restore his parents' belongings to their rightful places.
And that's not what I'm talking, by the way.
No, I know, of course. Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is, if you think about it, that is sort of the satisfying penultimate conclusion.
Yes.
Similar to how in Ferris Bueller, which I always suspected borrowed from this movie to
very
some
much
extent.
so, I think.
Yeah, his final sprint home. I think that sort of is wholly satisfying, so that then the actual ending or the epilogue, however you want to classify it, and I'm talking about now the theatrical cut.
Yeah, but remember, there's also the ending beyond when the parents come home, where Joel finds out he gets into Princeton. I think that's also...
Well, yeah, depending on how you want to break it down, there's a few endings, but I'm saying the moment where the mother magically or surreally is able to know that something had happened while they were gone because the egg is cracked, right? Which is such a great commentary on how nothing is ever perfect and you can't really get away with anything entirely that's mischievous. And by the way, that moment also speaks in a sort of subconscious way, right? Again, this movie is very oblique at times.
And
right?
dreamy. It's very
dreamy, yes. Because, that whole thing with the egg, right? It's a symbolic and parabolic commentary, right? It's that moment where the mother discovers that there's a flaw now in her precious egg. That is not something that is just spelled out for you, right? The significance of that moment is not spelled out for you. You are invited
Joel can't
to
even see it. Joel can't even see the flaw, and the mom somehow can. And that's sort of interesting about perception. But I was going
Yeah.
to say, what's interesting is when Guido is selling him back the furniture at the end, and they get to the end of it, and it seems like Joel's bought everything. Vicky has to remind him she's still got the egg. And I always thought that was interesting, that Joel wasn't even cognizant. They bought everything back except the egg. Because I would have thought the first thing Joel would have bought out of the truck was the egg. He was, where's the egg? Where's the egg? And I don't know what that says about him and what that is saying about the scene, or maybe,
Well, he also doesn't know how to cook TV dinners, so
yes.
maybe he's not the most perceptive person when it comes to certain
Well, he
things.
doesn't know how to cook TV dinners because it's always been done for him.
Exactly, yeah. But regardless, and by the way, that's a hilarious moment. The other thing I want to say is we talked about how great Rebecca De Mornay is in this movie, and she is. She was only 24 when she filmed this film, and she is. We were talking about Kathleen Turner the other day when we did our Body Heat episode. Rebecca De Mornay is also remarkably poised and confident by any age's standard, but I mean, at her age, it's incredible. And then let's talk about Tom Cruise's performance. He was only 20 when they filmed the movie, and I think his performance is extraordinary because he manages to do so many things that are hard to do. He is vulnerable, he is naive, but then he later on in the film becomes charismatic and entrepreneurial and cool. And sometimes he can convey all these traits simultaneously. So it's a remarkable performance, I think, especially given his age. But it would be remarkable regardless
Well,
of
I
the person's
think
age.
most people would agree. I think Tom Cruise would agree that this is the movie that gave him his career.
I think he should have received an Oscar nomination.
But I mean, he had done The Outsiders before and he had done Taps before. And neither of those movies were his movies. He was in very much
Supporting
smaller
roles.
supporting roles. This is the movie that gave him Top Gun.
That's
So,
right.
and Tom Cruise is on the director's commentary along with Paul Brickman and John Avnet. And Tom Cruise is very grateful to director and producer because he realizes what an important film this was for him. And you see how affectionate he is toward them and respectful towards them that he is because he understood what a huge opportunity this film was for him. And according to them, he worked so hard on this film. They were shooting many, many hours over schedule, and he would be sent from one location to the next, riding the bike around town. Then they would take him to another scene. He never complained. He'd be acting in the freezing cold with ice cream on his face. He never complained. I mean, he sounds like, and like he is still today, he sounds like a total team player, somebody who wants to get the job done, who loves what he does, who still appreciates what he does. So this was a commentary recorded in 2009, and he couldn't be more appreciative of having done this movie and more on board with this movie. And it's so great to hear because on the commentary, he displays no attitude about being the world's biggest movie star, one of the biggest movie stars. He just remembers everything about the shoot. And it was so great to hear a big movie star still remember where he came from and understand that this movie in this current universe that we live in gave it to him all. There was actually a chance that he didn't do it because he had been working all night on The Outsiders apparently and flew into LA to do the audition with Paul Brickman, and they were supposed to meet outside this apartment where Tom Cruise was staying, and Cruise overslept, and Paul Brickman was waiting outside, and this was before there were cell phones, and Brickman was about to this is about half an hour late or 45 minutes late, and Brickman was, I don't know what to do, I think I'm just going to leave, and at that point, Cruise just came out of the apartment building, and if Brickman had walked away and said, fuck this guy, he's not professional, or let's go find someone else, who knows what the universe would have in store for Tom Cruise. I mean, I'm sure he would have turned up in something else because he is so super charismatic and talented. But this.
Well, it's interesting that Timothy Hutton, who after Risky Business would never be as big a star as Tom Cruise. In other words, Tom Cruise eclipsed him as a star with Risky Business. But between Ordinary People and Risky Business, Timothy Hutton was the bigger star. So for that 3-year period approximately, Timothy Hutton was the bigger name.
But wasn't that around
Um,
the time that the Brat Pack was exploding out? And even though Tom Cruise wasn't technically part of the Brat Pack, he always
that was
seemed
also
apart
a
from it.
factor, yeah.
But half the
Um,
cast of The Outsiders seemed like they came out of the Brat Pack too.
Yes, that was another phenomenon.
Although The Outsiders, I don't think was that successful as a movie. I wasn't in America at the time, so I remember seeing it in South Africa and liking the movie a lot. But I don't know if The Outsiders landed
No, it was never
in
as
that.
big as something like Risky Business. But I will also just say that Timothy Hutton, especially when he was young, was an extraordinary actor, I think. And he had a poetic sensibility. He seemed like a poet
But he
of
didn't seem
sorts.
like, I would say
And
this, he didn't seem like a fun actor. He always
no,
played very
no,
morose characters, whereas
correct.
Tom Cruise projects fun and sort of this fresh-faced quality. And it was interesting on the commentary where, you know, the famous moment where he's been interviewed by Richard Masur for Princeton, and Masur says, well, you don't really have the grades to be Princeton quality. And Tom Cruise sort of looks at Rebecca De Mornay. I love that exchange between them. And he goes,
Yes.
I'm done with this bullshit.
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, sometimes you just got to say, what the fuck? And then he stands up, or he takes out the sunglasses and he stands
Yeah.
up and he puts them on and he makes that frat boy face, which
Yeah,
apparently
it's great.
Cruz hated. He did not want to do that. Brickman had to basically goad him into doing it, saying, I think this is going to work, because Cruz thought that belonged in a different movie. And Cruz said, I learned my lesson about trying things that the director wants you to try, because that became an iconic moment from the film and was used in so much of the publicity. So
Yes. And by the way, Timothy Hutton wouldn't have been able to pull off
that's
that
exactly
exact
what I
moment
was
in the
getting
same
to.
way.
I don't
Yes.
think Timothy Hutton could have done that moment, pulled it off. And frankly, I don't think he could have pulled off anything in Risky Business, because the vibe of the movie, Tom Cruise walks this incredible balance of being this in over his head teenager, but at the same time still having that cheeky, sexy kind of vibe to him, where you can understand
Yes.
how a cynical call girl like Lana would fall in love with him.
Yes, I agree. And but the only reason I mentioned Timothy Hutton is because they were in Taps together, Tom Cruise and Timothy Hutton.
Right.
And it's just amazing because you were talking about how you never know how things could have turned out for Tom Cruise if he hadn't been in Risky Business at the time that he ended up being in it. It's just interesting to think that Timothy Hutton could have ended up being the better known actor, even if Timothy Hutton had never gotten any bigger than he ended up becoming. Because Tom Cruise, his career trajectory could have taken any number of other roads. So the thing is, I find that fascinating, just how the two actors sort of traded
But, you know,
places.
although Tom Cruise has taken the more commercial route and is associated with huge popcorn movies today, I've always considered him a phenomenal actor.
Same. I
And
think he's a great
and,
actor.
you know, you just watched Born on the Fourth of July again, you told me, and that is an
It's a
incredible
masterpiece.
performance. His performance in Magnolia is fantastic. He's given some really,
Jerry Maguire,
really
I think he's
great,
amazing in Jerry Maguire.
even
Not
all
many
the
people
right
could do that.
moves, in all the right moves, which he does right after Risky Business. I've always loved that movie. I might like
Hmm.
that movie as much as Risky Business, and it's not as fun a movie at all as Risky Business, but he's a super compelling actor.
He is.
And it's unfortunate that he's never won an Oscar for acting, when I think he should have won on Born on the Fourth of July. I forget
I
who he was
agree.
up against on that film, but
Daniel Day-Lewis won instead. He also gave a great performance in My Left Foot. But if I had to pick, I would have given the Oscar to Tom Cruise
I
for
would
Born on the
too.
Fourth of
I
July.
would too.
And I would have given him an Oscar nomination, if not the actual Oscar for lead actor for Risky Business.
And I would have given Rebecca De Mornay an Oscar nomination, because
Same. Yes, she's extraordinary. Both of them are extraordinary in this film. It's uncommon to have an actor of any age deliver compelling performances of the standards that these ones live up to. But the fact that they were so young when they delivered them makes
yeah,
the performances even
I
more
actually
remarkable.
contend that Cruise could not have given the performance he gave in Risky Business without Rebecca De Mornay acting against him, because she grounds the performance every time they're on screen together. She's so
Yes.
subtle, her looks, she's playing so many different things in her eyes that
Yes.
it
And
truly
he
is.
does too, by the way, because here's the thing. And by the way, just as a general note, this movie is full of subtleties. And there's a scene in particular where the morning after Joel and Lana have had sex, Lana approaches Joel and says, "Did you have a good time last night?" And Joel tries to play it cool, but also he's a bit, embarrassed to speak his mind exactly in relation to what she wants him to talk about. And the expression that he has on his face is just perfectly modulated. as it turns into something else.
She says something to him, or
Well,
he
he says,
says
I had a
something
great
like,
time.
"Do
He
I?"
admits he had a great time.
No, but then he says something like, "Don't tell me I owe you another $300." And you
No, yeah,
see
that's right after. Yeah,
his
correct.
ears drop. Did you notice that? Like his facial expression, and they pointed out
Masterfully done.
it's so he wasn't even aware he did it, but he's like when he goes, "Oh my God, do I owe you another $300?" And you just see his facial expression, his ears
Yes.
literally descend. No, it's great. I mean, they apparently took like a year to cast this movie because David Geffen said to them, "Don't rush it. Find the exact actors you want for this movie. We're making this movie. You don't have to
He was
worry." Can
right.
you imagine living in a fucking industry like that today where the financier of the movie says, "Cast whoever you want. Take your time, make sure you've got the right actors," instead of saying, "Oh, you've got to get these 10 actors and this guy's only available now, and this one's window's closing, he won't be available for the next 2 years," and all this bullshit. It was same with Body Heat. Kathleen Turner and William Hurt were not big stars at all because Kathleen Turner hadn't done a movie before, and Hurt's movies I don't think had even been released by the time he was doing Body Heat. And they allowed them to use actors like that, and it would never happen today unless you had a rich sugar daddy who was throwing private equity at you to go make the movie you wanted to. And even then, you'd be too cynical to just go with no-name actors because you wouldn't get distribution on it.
Yes, that's right. Well, first of all, David Geffen is an incredible mogul. He's also an incredible producer. And the two producers on Risky Business are also great producers.
By the
So,
way, I have a David Geffen story if you want to hear it.
oh, yeah, go on.
So my film Running Scared came out sometime late February or something in it, and the opening weekend, a lot of critics beat up on the film, especially this toxic female critic in the LA Times. She just hated the movie and she tore into it. I can't remember her name, which is probably just as well, but it's probably Googleable or searchable. And I get a phone call from my agent, and he says, "David Geffen wants to talk to you." And I'm like, shit, what did I offend him in my movie somehow? And I said, okay. My agent said he's going to call you. So, and he said, you should actually ask David Geffen if you can have lunch with him at his house, because apparently he had this amazing, huge mansion in LA, in the west side of LA. I'm trying to remember where it was. I think Jeff Bezos owns it now. But it's this enormous property. I think it's Beverly Hills, somewhere in there. So David Geffen calls me, and I'm expecting him. I don't know what I'm expecting. I'm expecting something pretty negative. And he says to me, "Wayne, I just saw your movie at a private screening." This is Running Scared he's talking about. He says,
Yes.
"I fucking loved it. I think this movie is amazing. I cannot believe these reviews that this movie's getting, especially the one in the LA Times that I just read. I want you to know that people who count, or people like me, think it's a fantastic movie." I was just like almost shaking. I was like,
What a wonderful
wow.
surprise.
And then I said to him, "Well, do you want to have lunch sometime?" I heard you got an amazing house." And he goes, "Yeah, sure." And then he puts it on the calendar. And I ended up going to have lunch with him, which was fantastic. Just me and David Geffen. And he's like, let me just paint the picture for you. You're driving through the gates to get to David Geffen's mansion. You arrive at this huge fucking house on your right, and then you realize that's not the house, that's the guest house. So you keep driving like another half a mile up the driveway, and eventually you come to the house, and there's a butler waiting to receive you. And he takes you into the living room, which is also like turns into a screening room. And then David Geffen's there, and he was very cool. And I'll never forget this moment. We're sitting at lunch, and he's going, "So what are you going to do next?" So I tell him, "I just made a deal to do this movie Crossing Over for Harvey Weinstein with Harrison Ford." And right away, David Geffen goes, "Tell me about the movie you're going to do after that, because that movie's going to be a shit show with Harvey Weinstein. You'll never get the movie you want out of it." And I thought, well, that's pretty presumptuous of you, but he couldn't have been more on the money. I mean, he nailed it right then and there in the conversation. So that's my
That's a great story.
that's my David Geffen story. I mean, it's not like he said, "Wayne, here's $20 million. Let's make a movie together." I think he was kind of out of the movie making business at that time. I think he had already sold out of DreamWorks, but it was just great to have that experience.
And well, yeah. And I was just going to add that he was responsible for getting a number of great movies made, including, in addition to Risky Business, Beetlejuice and Michael Collins. So he also had a very versatile, approach to getting movies made, right? He didn't
Yeah,
just do one type of movie. Um,
very good taste in films.
yes, and music, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But yeah, so the backers of this movie are great.
And
And
Paul Brickman had a friendship going back with John Avnet many, many years. So he had
yes,
a very strong producer on the project who backed him 100% and even gave him, from the sounds of it, really good notes on the script. So it
and
was like,
Steve Tisch was also involved.
yeah, and I don't know to what level of involvement that was, but it sounded like Brickman had a really good first time experience and probably didn't realize how shitty it could get for a filmmaker out there without that support system. And maybe that's what he did find out very soon after. And if I came out of the experience of directing Risky Business, which it doesn't look like a cheap movie, it looks like they had plenty time to get all the cool style that they needed. If I come out of that experience and the only note is, well, can you please tweak the ending a little bit? I would think that I had done really well. And then the movie
Yeah.
becomes a hit. And it sounded like he also had a lot of input in the marketing because apparently they wanted to go with a poster of Tom Cruise in bed surrounded by all the prostitutes. And Brickman said, that's not this movie. And they went outside of the marketing department to come up with the concept that is the famous Risky Business poster with Tom Cruise like lowering his sunglasses.
It's a great poster.
Yeah, and he said he even had to fight them on that because they wanted to put like a twinkle in or like a sparkle in Cruz's eyes, and he says, "Get rid of that. You don't need that." But those are the days when the marketing department would actually listen to the filmmaker's point of view. Because I've never had success with any marketing department on any movie I directed where I would say to them, "I don't think this poster is going to sell the movie. It's a nice piece of art, but I don't know what the hell the movie is." And then they would say to me, well, nobody cares about the poster. It's the trailer that's going to sell the movie. Or
Yes.
I've seen trailers of my own movies that give away the entire movie. And I'd say, could you please take that shot out? That's a complete spoiler. I would have to tell them that it wouldn't be like they would know it themselves that they're ruining the movie.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works. But yeah, I'm very impressed with the marketing materials for this film, including the poster that you mentioned. And another thing I wanted to talk about in relation to this movie is how well it is able to switch gears. So one moment it's a playful comedy, the next it's a mournful commentary on chronic dissatisfaction. Sometimes it combines different vibes together, different emotional states together. And also it's a very seductive movie, which would make sense given what it's what it's about. But for example, when Joel calls Lana for the first time and he lowers his mask, like that's so well done. And of course, you got the neon light
It's
there
great
creating
because
this.
he's hiding behind the
Yeah,
mask.
exactly.
It's such a
And it's a great moment. And you have the character's vulnerability mixed in with his excitement, with the seductive nature of what's going on. So many different emotional states are being communicated at the same time and all successfully, which is remarkable to me. And there's a surreal vibe when he's waiting on the couch for her to show up. And then, of course, it sort of becomes a parody of
well,
a
when she
porno
enters
film.
the house, it almost feels like one of his dreams, right? It feels
Yeah,
like you can't see the suture between the reality and the fantasy because she
correct.
just comes striding into the house. I don't even remember she rang the doorbell at all or something, but she just like appears in the house in a very ethereal way and then when he comes over to the window with her and they start making love, and then the window blows open and all the leaves start blowing, it's so artistic and dreamy. The sense
Yes.
throughout the movie, there is this dreamy quality to the film, which is also reinforced by the Tangerine Dream score, which is the way I tried to describe it earlier, that you almost don't know if the entire movie is a dream. You go to sleep, your parents have left town, and then you suddenly find yourself in this nocturnal world of like pimps and hookers
Yeah.
and craziness and the dad's Porsche going into the water. I was going to mention,
Well, it's a very neurotic film, which is also interesting too, because so many of the people who made this movie are Jewish. So it's interesting because there's a Freudian tradition that is
it's
being
true,
continued by neurotic Jews, right? And
but I love
it may seem trivial what I just said, but it probably isn't. Because you can even go to someone like Kafka, right, where he plays with ideas of sexual guilt in surreal ways, right? Or Arthur Schnitzler, another great
Yeah.
Jewish writer. So I think it's actually a significant
Well,
neurotic
you're forgetting the
phenomenon.
grandfather of that is Philip
Um,
Roth.
yeah, of course.
This could be a Philip Roth movie.
Correct.
And if this was made 20 years earlier, it would have been Richard Benjamin. Although I think Richard Benjamin could have ever been as sort of appealing or sexy as Tom Cruise. I just think that he has more of a nerdy vibe.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise had to become nerdy to fit into this role. And from what I understand, he had to put on a bit of weight. He had to sort of transform himself because when you look at Tom Cruise, you don't think nerdy, right? It was also
No.
interesting is Paul Brickman asked Tom Cruise, did you have the character of Joel Goodson in mind when you did Jerry Maguire? And Cruise thought about that and he goes, not intentionally, but I can totally see that this is where Joel Goodson could end up. And he conceded that there was like a through line to that character. And I didn't even think about that, but in thinking about it, in processing, and I go, that could be Joel Goodson.
That's right. For sure.
And I wanted to
Um,
mention something before I forget
yeah.
about the sex scene with the opening scene when Lana comes in. And then you see them having sex throughout the house. And I love that because you see Joel and Lana having sex on the staircase. And the camera tracks across to pictures of Joel as a toddler and as a young boy. And they do that again at another time in the movie. And I think it's so interesting the way Brickman is saying the little boy has grown up, as all little boys do, to wanting to have sex with beautiful women and the loss of innocence.
And there's, of course, and I was actually going to bring up that exact moment, so I'm glad you did
And then the next scene, which I also think is really cool, is he's having sex with Lana in the chair while the TV's on, and you see the American flag waving. So it's like the all-American boy, the all-American fantasy. There was just something.
and because the country is virile.
Yes, and it's Reagan time,
That's
so
right.
there's a positivity and there's not to talk about the underlining issues that Reaganomics created, but the attitude was go go, make money, capitalism, the American way, and I think Brickman is commenting on all of that in those sequences.
Yes, but I do want to mention that moment where you see the picture of him as a young child, because this movie is at times mournful when it comes to the loss of innocence. So the movie is playful, definitely, and by the way, brilliantly so, but it's also one of the best movies ever made about the loss of innocence. And adulthood does have its hang-ups,
Yeah,
and we see them in this movie.
because
So in other words,
on the wall, those pictures reflect who Joel's parents think he is. But
yes.
what's happening on the stairs is so far from their understanding of who their son is now. And also, what sex scene in a movie about teenagers trying to get laid or indulging their fantasies cuts to a picture of the same kid when he's a child? I mean, it's such an original
It is.
juxtaposition that it is straight out of a Philip Roth scenario. I mean, this movie is just playing in a different league to every other movie that came along like this.
And I would argue, which I did earlier when I did the intro for this episode, that in some ways this film actually surpasses the best work of Luis Buñuel and Bernardo Bertolucci, because it is not coming up with ideologically driven metaphors or symbols as those filmmakers could sometimes find themselves doing. It is more original than that because it's a film that's not burdened with any sort of ideological view of the world. It's a much more idiosyncratic film in some ways. Because the movie isn't, despite the fact that it is actually a great Reaganite satire, it is not overtly addressing Reagan culture or Reaganite culture.
Well, I think it's addressing how tough it is to make it in the world.
Yes,
I think
that's what I mean, though. It's a more elemental rather than political commentary, which is what I also think makes the movie more original than even some of the best movies by those.
And it's also, for sure, a coming-of-age film, except
It
the
is.
person who brings Joel Goodson's character of age is the cynical, she's not that much older than him, but this cynical being around the block call girl who really teaches Joel what the real world is. I mean, his
Yes.
experience with Guido and setting up the prostitution night with all his friends and then losing it all because Guido steals all the furniture from the house. He goes through an entire education. This is like 4 years of the school of hard knocks taught to him by this group of people, these denizens of the night, so to speak, that he's just come into contact with. Another movie that this film really reminds me of in so many ways is Ron Howard's Night Shift, which is a film that I have great affection for. I don't think it's as good as this film, but
it's got moments.
It shares very much many of the same themes and plot devices, like dorky guys who have nothing to do with this world of hot call girls get involved in managing them and sharing in the economic windfall of figuring out how to get people laid in a city morgue. And the fact that Henry Winkler's character gets very close to the lead prostitute or one of the prostitutes, the Shelley Long character. And there's a lightheartedness to this film, but at the same time, it is about a sort of nerdy guy finding the strength within him to stand on his own and to say, this is the kind of life I want to live. So there are a lot of things in that movie that it's doing, but in a more goofy kind of sitcomish way, but it also has probably a lot more nudity than Risky Business.
That movie is also more rough around the edges. Risky Business is very pristine. Every scene is so well constructed. Every shot is so well constructed.
I don't think Night Shift is a poorly made movie at all. I think Ron Howard was always a very good
I love Ron Howard.
filmmaker.
I think A Beautiful Mind and
but I love the heart of Night
Years.
Shift. Night Shift has a great heart to it, and it's a way less cynical movie than Risky Business, which in a way makes it a lesser movie than Risky Business. But it's definitely a much more uplifting ending. It's also like a kinky fairy tale. And the thing with Risky Business is it doesn't end in the place where Joel and Lana drive off into the sunset. They're most likely not going to be together. They most likely would 20 years from now run into each other on the street and say, hey, how you doing? Or maybe they have an affair many years later or something like that. But the movie leaves you in a very unsettled, ambiguous place. And there's a weightiness to it. That Night Shift leaves you in a happily ever after place. And obviously,
the ending of Risky Business, I think, is right on the money, no pun intended, because it is communicating what is wrong with not just capitalist society, but any sort of developed society. In other words, the idea that anyone who does a job that they don't like is a prostitute is a very multifaceted one, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. Now, that's an interesting thing to also bring up, that the idea of the prostitute, the metaphor of the prostitute, is used in this movie in very interesting ways. Right, the world's oldest profession in Reagan's era, is being explored in a satirical way, but also in a way that is mournful. Because the movie's basically saying it's a tragedy that we have to grow up. It's a tragedy that we have to go out and make a living and become prostitutes in one way or another. That's what makes this movie timeless. It's not about only the window dressing of the Reagan era.
But you know what's interesting is at this point in the Reagan era, Reagan creates the Mies Commission, right? Where he goes off to pornography, and you feel like that's a very conservative sort of head in the sand kind of attitude about who human beings are. But yet the movies that were being made, like Risky Business, were very risque, far more than anything getting made today. So even with the Mies Commission coming down on pornography, I feel like the films were way less repressed, or the pushback against something like that.
100%.
Risky Business and the movies that came out in the 80s like this were far more entertaining and risk-taking. And it was interesting on the commentary, I think you'll like this because I don't know if you remember this, but they were talking about in 2009 when they recorded the DVD commentary whether Risky Business could be made today. And their today was 2009, not 2026. Yes. And they all kind of agreed it couldn't be made even back then in 2009. And then they started joking. And I don't know if it was Brickman or John Avnet who said, even the electric train people would have a problem with it today.
Yes. Oh, and by the way.
And Cruz brought up, by the way, smoking.
Yes.
None of them brought up the prostitution.
Well, there, yeah, that's right. But in addition, I just wanted to mention that the Phil Collins song is used extremely well.
Oh, amazing.
That's a
Amazing.
masterpiece unto
You
itself.
know, most people, when they associate the train ride with the Phil Collins song, they don't realize that the Phil Collins song actually ends before they start making love, and the Tangerine Dream track takes
Yes.
over, and that's the sexier part of the track. It's like the Phil Collins song is the prelude to all that, and then it works so
It's the
well.
foreplay section.
Yeah, exactly. It's great as foreplay, but if you want to close the deal, you got to bring in Tangerine Dream.
Yes. There you go.
And then you've got that great shot at the end of that whole sequence where the train is pulling away and they got the spark on the track.
Yes.
And it's almost like a legendary shot. Like that's not a visual effect. It just happened. And then you got the perfect sound effect over it. That's filmmaking for you when stuff like that happens. It's
Yes,
yeah.
for sure. And I just wanted to mention something else about the Reagan culture at the time. It's again, to me, instance of not realizing how good you have it until it's too late. Because many of the problems that were being faced at that time domestically were relatively trivial to what we're going through right now. You know, the Michigas, because I always like to insert a Yiddish word when I can, that we have to go through today is far more sinister and often imported, you know, so all of the isms that I don't like that are totalitarian in nature, from communism to jihadism, whatever it may be, we're dealing with things that you don't see on the streets in Joel's neighborhood. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a suburb north of Toronto, which resembled very much the neighborhood of Joel. And there wasn't a single dark geopolitical cloud on the horizon. The most you had to worry about was what Joel's character had to worry about,
Yeah.
right? Like just the burden of having to
Or get
grow
it
into an
get
adult.
or the burden of having to get into an Ivy League college.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we should talk about that because I'm sure you love that whole theme of showing what a sham getting into an Ivy League college is.
Oh, I loved it.
And,
When I was in university, I would cite this movie and many others
and
to
what a
show what's so
sham the
wrong.
education has become to the
Yeah.
point that very few people even have respect for it today. But this movie planted the roots, saying they're supposed to be the standard of like taking in students with the highest GPAs or whatever that is. But the truth is,
They
you're
just
either
want
getting in
pimps. They
you're
just want
getting in
pimps.
based on daddy's money, or you're able to pimp for
Yeah.
the college interviewer, get him laid, or show this enormous business sense of creating a prostitution ring that he gets to witness, and that's the thing that gets you into the school. All of
Yes.
it is just the superficial veneer of bullshit of people being able to come out of these schools and go, oh, I went to Princeton, I went to Harvard, I went to whatever the fuck. And none of it, other than having daddy and mommy's money behind you, means anything in this world anymore because these schools are so corrupted on every fucking level.
Correct. And when I was in university, I actually wrote a satirical play against educational institutions at all levels. And I actually put it on in New York City in a black box theater. So it was off Broadway. I was in my first year of graduate school when I put on that play with some friends in New York City. And things have just gotten far worse since then. So the play was actually quite prescient in many ways because I basically was satirizing how fascism and other totalitarian ideologies were running the show. The other thing I will say is it's not the institution that matters, it's the people that matter. So it's the people who make the institution, not the other way around. It's very important to remember this. But of course, that's not how society as a whole works in Western countries, put it that way, right? There's this idea that if you get into Harvard, it somehow will be a transformative experience and you will become a better, more enlightened person. But of course, that's all nonsense. The individual always has to be judged as an individual.
Well, it's like the
So you can
surface
be,
gloss of somebody coming out of one of these schools, and when they're going for a job, they go, oh, you were at Harvard, you were at Princeton. It's the same kind of thing like when you're a filmmaker and you don't have, let's say, the massive hit movie on your resume. So when you're trying to get a movie made, I don't have Risky Business on my IMDb credits, or I don't have Jerry Maguire, whatever that movie is that give somebody this veneer of being, oh, the celebrated filmmaker. I mean, I probably have some respectable movies, but it's all about perception. This business, as well as getting into Harvard, as well as the success in that business world, it's a perception of who someone is, because there is no guarantee that if you put an A-list filmmaker with an A-list cast and an A-list screenwriter, that the movie will turn out well at all. Whereas you can have people who you think haven't made a good movie ever, or haven't made a good movie in a long time, put them together the right script. There's a certain alchemy that happens. There's certain alchemy in the casting. You don't go for a bigger star. You go for somebody who's undervalued. And suddenly that's the hit movie. So none of this matters in a sense. I mean, if you go to university, whichever one it is, you would hope you get to actually learn a real curriculum that can help you out in the world. But I have met so many people who are graduates of Ivy League school who I think are the dumbest motherfuckers on the planet. And I don't know how they made it through school. They cannot think for themselves. They're super prejudiced in the way they think, and they're very unimpressive.
Did you ask them if they ran a whorehouse when they were going to school?
Well, that's a prerequisite for
because you didn't ask that question.
I wonder what Princeton and the people who are in the administration at Princeton thought of this movie, because you don't need to get them on board with saying the name of Princeton, and I don't think anyone was pulling out a Princeton branded T-shirt. Although
Richard Mazur's character in Risky Business is key to understanding the film's disdain for the superficiality of
exactly. But we should all be so lucky if a university scout is like Richard Mazur, a guy who can think for himself, who can be impressed by the unseen potential of a kid that doesn't exist on paper. I do love that moment, and I love
it works both ways.
I love the Richard Mazur character, because at the same time that he confirms the bullshit of the recruiting process for these schools, he is the one guy who had a soul and had common sense and didn't disqualify Joel just because of the stats of what he read. And I've always marveled over the fact that students get into these schools based on writing a dynamic or really personal or impressive essay, but you don't even know how much of that essay they actually wrote because you weren't in the room with them.
And with AI today, it's really frightening to consider what's going on.
Even when I first got to this country in 86, getting into the right school has always seemed like winning the lottery. It should not be like that.
No, it should be about merit and nothing else.
Yeah.
But
America used to be a meritocracy at one point. It sure
as
hell
never
isn't
perfect,
anymore.
But
never perfect. Never perfect.
It was better in that regard, yes.
But you could deliver the best work, write the best essay, be impressive at what you do, and you would get invited into the system. Today, it's so much more than that. As we talk about it, it's checking boxes. Unfortunately, we come out of a past that didn't give opportunity to all the people. So we now exist in a place where the overcorrection makes no sense, but in some way was needed. It's not black and white, because I do look back at the lack of opportunity Black people and minorities and women had in this country, even though I didn't live in this country at the time. But at the same time, you can't change who you are. Just because you're a white person or a white male in America doesn't mean that you don't want a life anymore and you understand the sins of the past. It doesn't mean that you have to roll over and give up your dreams, or my son to give up his dreams for that matter, because of the sins of the past. It should be an even playing field, and everybody should start from there. It shouldn't be, we're correcting the board now.
No, instead we have a lot of Maoists, essentially, who go around punishing reactionaries and revising history and being vengeful toward people who don't deserve their vengeance. It's a very totalitarian climate that we're now living in, unfortunately. And I hope that, and I do think ultimately the West and meritocracy will succeed. I just don't know how long it's going to take, and I don't know how much damage will be done along the way.
I'm shocked that Risky Business hasn't been remade. I have to believe there were attempts, or have been attempts, and maybe there's, whether Paul Brickman retains some kind of say in it, I don't think so, but it feels like a movie that could be remade for sure. with obviously a different point of view, but it certainly wouldn't be made the way this version was made. And maybe it's the prostitution thing that's keeping it from being remade, because through the lens of today, Rebecca De Mornay's character and her friends would definitely be seen as exploited. And the other thing about Risky Business, and we talk about this every week, is it's definitely a film with the male gaze. It's not the most extreme version of that, but it's a movie that has no problem having the camera love Rebecca De Mornay and her prostitute friends. And I was watching it the other night again, and I was focusing on the scene. I think it's the scene where Rebecca De Mornay is talking to Joel, and they're in one of the rooms, and it's during the party or near the end of the party. And I'd never noticed this before. In the background, there's a naked woman putting her clothes back on. I've never seen that before, because the performance between Rebecca De Mornay and Tom Cruise is so compelling. My eye has always been pulled to them on the screen.
There you go.
And I found that interesting, because usually if you throw a naked woman into the background, your eye goes there. At least my male gazing roving eye.
Yes.
But when you've got strong actors commanding the frame, you don't go there. And I think that's a great lesson for filmmakers too.
It is a great lesson. You need actors as charismatic as Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay, then you have no problem.
And it's interesting because Rebecca De Mornay's character, Lana, does not flaunt her sexuality. She doesn't even dress like a bimbo or anything in the movie. She oozes sexuality, but when she's on screen, we take her seriously. We don't think of her I certainly don't see her as a sex object. I see her as a formidable presence.
Yeah, she's actually intimidating in some
She's very intimidating. I do feel scared for Tom Cruise, and I also and I also wonder when the other shoe is going to drop and she's going to fuck Joel over in the worst possible way. And it's interesting when he says to her in the very end of the movie, and I don't know if this is the director's cut or in both of them, when they're in the restaurant, and Joel says, were you in on it with Guido and Vicky at the end and I don't know if he's referring to from the first night when she came over to his place and she took the egg, or to the stealing of all the furniture out of the house. It's never quite clear to me if he's asking her if this was a setup from the go, or was it just that last night when he went with her on the train and they used that as the opportunity to ransack the house? And she says no. And I believe her because I'm an idiot. But it's interesting because I'm just playing it through my mind. And I never really think of Rebecca De Mornay as being exploited in this role. I never feel like, wow, the camera is always on her ass or her legs or whatever. But her presence is always like attractive and beautiful in the movie. And before I forget, I do have to bring this up about the movie, which I think is absolutely amazing. And I challenge viewers to go back and watch this film. In almost every shot in this film, there is the color red, or an element of red, and it is pervasive.
And it pops.
Yeah, suggesting red light district or heated sex, but it is definitely conscious in the production design and the costume choices. There's even like a red wheelbarrow outside. There's a red fridge magnet. They wear a lot of red clothes, including the Letterman jackets. There's the red neon lights, brake lights. There's a Ritz cracker box. There's a red tea kettle.
Tom Cruise is wearing red very often.
Yeah. Even the children who are watching him buying all the furniture back on the lawn in there, and one of them's wearing red. And it's not discussed on the director's commentary at all, which I thought they would have got into more of the aesthetics and the production design of it. But absolutely a conscious choice in this film. There are maybe 3 or 4 shots in the entire movie where you don't see red.
That's a very good observation there.
And I want to say, when I saw this movie the first time, I came away with that thought in my mind. When I saw it on 16 millimeter and I was recording the videotape of it, it hit me like that immediately. And it was like this dreamy quality, this pulsating sexiness or this forbiddenness of the red light always. And I think other films have imitated that in that way, but it was just such a smartly designed film from that point of view, because when you're doing that, it does take a lot of effort on the production design and costume designer's eyes to constantly finding where you use it and where it doesn't become too much.
I agree. And this movie is even more exquisitely rendered than some of the most famous art house films ever made. I'm not exaggerating, at least I don't think I'm exaggerating. There's not a single
There are
scene that goes on too long. There's not a single shot that
The
is,
blocking is fantastic.
it's exquisite,
There's
I
so many
think.
shots where like they'll be having a conversation and then Tom Cruise leaves the frame and then he comes back in to emphasize a point. Or almost every shot, it's very Spielbergian. The way the camera starts on one character and then moves off and you see something else going on in the frame and then hands the story off to these other characters.
And how
He's
about the
doing,
point of view shots early on when his parents are about to leave the house?
yeah,
Um,
fantastic.
Very well done.
And like you couldn't even get away with that today because they would say your movie star is Tom Cruise and why are you keeping the camera off him for like 40
Yeah,
seconds or a minute?
that's
And
right.
it's very confidently made, very confidently.
It is. And it's interesting too because in my intro, at the beginning of this episode, I mentioned that I consider this one of the top four Salingerian films of the 20th century. What I meant by that is Rebel Without a Cause, The Graduate, Risky Business, and American Beauty. I just listed the films in chronological order. All have Salingerian themes, if not attitudes and vibes. The Catcher in the Rye was never allowed to be adapted into a film, a direct adaptation. But these movies, in terms of the way that they feel and in terms of their sentiments, are very similar to The Catcher in the Rye because we have a young man who has to navigate through the superficiality of modern society and has to deal with the burden of growing up, even biologically speaking, has to deal with the burden of sex for the first time and the excitement that comes with that. And I think it needs to be better understood that all the films I just mentioned, including Risky Business, owe a debt of gratitude to J.D. Salinger. I think without him, you couldn't have movies like this. If you had never had Rebel Without a Cause, you couldn't have had The Graduate. And without The Graduate, you couldn't have had Risky Business.
Yeah, I feel
Oh,
I definitely feel the DNA is in The Graduate. And even
and each of these movies is so exquisitely rendered,
speak
aesthetically and plot-wise in every way.
right. And even speaking of Philip Roth, what's the Richard Benjamin, Ally McGraw movie? Oh, Goodbye Columbus.
Yes,
It
you
feels
can add
like,
that for
yeah,
sure.
which is a wonderfully underrated, underseen movie that I implore people who are listening to this to try and find
It's a
it.
great movie.
Yeah,
And that's also a Salingerian film because of course Salinger predates Philip Roth. Without J.D. Salinger, you could argue you wouldn't have certain Philip Roth novels. It's fascinating. I always play these games of connect the dots.
but
But
the other thing which we should highlight is how good the screenplay is and
oh,
how
it's
great
very good.
is Paul Brickman's dialogue. There are so many pieces of dialogue that are still quoted today. This film really has had a lasting impact on people who grew up in this era. I mean, I love the line that Joe Pantoliano's character says to Tom Cruise in his front yard. He goes, "In a sluggish economy, you never fuck with another man's livelihood."
Yes.
There's so many good lines, including the one after they go to the car repair shop after they pulled the car out of the lake. And the guy comes out and goes, "Who's the U-boat commander?" Which I mentioned before. There's so many good lines in this movie
Oh,
that
you know a scene that, by the way, couldn't probably be done today in a movie? The scene where he grabs
the nurse.
the nurse. That would not be allowed, or maybe not literally, but I mean, you'd have
Well,
a
I
harder
think he
time
could
doing
grab
it.
the nurse. I just don't think he's coming back to school, period. He gets like suspended for a few days.
That's right. But that's a great moment too. And by the way, that scene is surreal in its own way, right? Because he basically does something that is unrealistic
Yeah.
because it's the emotionally
Well, I think
truthful and satisfying outcome.
I think Brickman initially saw the movie as being more surreal than it ended up being because I'm sure you're aware of this, but the scene on the train, the sex scene on the train, originally had the train like taking off and flying in the air, and Brickman was trying to do like a Bertolucci surreal Fellini-esque fantasy moment, and they filmed it, but they hated the way it turned out. They thought this is terrible, and I think they reshot a lot of it, and that also tells you the kind of movie that Brickman had in his head at that time. And I can see how that worked. I can't see how, if you had executed that well, it could have worked because of the dreamy,
Of
surreal
course it could
quality to the
have,
movie.
yeah.
But I'm glad they didn't do it because it works much better with the music and being grounded. And the fact that instead of us thinking, oh, look at this, they're flying over the city and it's this whole trippy vibe to it, it focuses on the connection between the two of them. And even
And
the,
also, oh, go
well,
on.
yeah, even the prelude to that sequence with the African American couple on the train watching them and like, oh, what's going on with these two? And then you have the hobo on the train and they end up taking him off the train.
Yes, that's great.
It's just as great. For me, I've always said this and I always try to get there in my scripts. And I don't know if I do because it's the nature of the movie. Cinema works best when it's visual and it's music. And you can have great dialogue in a movie, but you've got to have sequences where you're just letting the camera tell the story and the music and the soundtrack is driving you along. And people will fall in love with your movie if you have the right vibe and the right chemistry with the actors. And it's so important to have those moments in films. And
Yes.
and that's like the elevator train sequence. That is what it's achieving, and it's what it's achieving when Lana first turns up at Joel's house. It's achieving in a bunch of times in the movie, like when he's trying desperately to get to Lana and he grabs his friend's bicycle and he's riding and then he's getting on the train and then he's running up the stairs to her apartment. And that scene where he reconciles with Lana, this is after he's been kicked out of school, and he runs up to her apartment and it's done without words. They just embrace each other in this very emotional hug, which I think is the most emotional moment in the film because you see the real Lana come out. And Brickman's camera just circles them in the room. I don't know if it was handheld or Steadicam, but what's also very cool is you can see Vicky in the background out of focus, like just looking on. And it feels like a very sincere scene. It doesn't feel out of place. It feels like these two people care about each other.
I agree, for sure. Another thing I wanted to mention is the shower scene near the very beginning of the movie.
Right. Also surreal.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece unto itself. See, that's the great thing about some of these movies that we've talked about on our podcast so far. Not only are they masterpieces unto themselves, but they have individual units within them that are masterpieces unto themselves.
They're idiosyncratic. They were allowed to be.
Yes.
They were allowed to breathe in that way in which I find films are not allowed to be today.
Correct. And that shower scene is surreal, but it's also immaculately staged and choreographed and edited. And of course
Apparently,
the
just
music,
that shower sequence took them 18 hours to shoot.
I can believe it.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the shower was like a set. They kept pulling the shower back. It like
Well,
was
that was part of the surrealism, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's basically, if you think about it, in addition to everything else that it is, a parody of a scene that you would see in a porno, right? Like in other
Yeah.
words,
Or in like a Sylvia Crystal teenage sex seduction movie.
yes. And then it becomes not only surreal, but also absurdist, where he starts having this funny dialogue with the woman in the shower, right? So,
Well, yeah,
and that goes back.
his dialogue is landing over her lips. You never actually hear a voice. It's always his voice speaking
Yes.
for her.
And that's also very
Very, well, that tells us, well, he's narrating it. He's telling us it's a dream from the start.
That's right.
And I don't mean to demean the erotic sex comedies or high school comedies that were coming out during that period, because I think most of them were better than anything we're getting today. We're not really even getting this whole genre of movie we're not getting. We're not seeing, whether it's an Animal House or it's The Sure Thing, or they were plentiful. These were films about young boys who wanted to get laid or have sex for the first time, and entire films were built around them. Mischief was one of them. And I can name you like 20, 30 of these movies in this genre that are not getting made today at all because they're seen as sexist or male gazy or whatever that is. But it was a great genre, all the right moves. I mean,
I wonder if this is a conspiracy to end the human race, right? Or the enemies of, let's say, the West, so let's say China,
The
Russia,
enemies of
Iran,
fun.
whatever, Qatar.
Enemies
Yeah,
of
but
fun.
no, but they want Westerners to stop reproducing, so they scare them into never having
Or
sex,
they want
thinking about it,
Westerners
and
to
then
become as conservative as they are and
that too.
overtly ashamed of sexuality. So let's all hide it under the rug and put it on SexTube or whatever the fuck these sites are that the people are going to, or OnlyFans, where it's all done sort of in private. But we can't go to the movie theater and enjoy a movie like Risky Business anymore because when
And
you
we can't laugh at
yeah,
ourselves.
we can't laugh at ourselves or the goofiness of men. I mean, we could list 300 movies from this time, including Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is another super smart, layered
It
film
is.
in the genre. And most of these films had something to say about the human condition. They weren't just about guys trying to get laid. They were learning life lessons. Even Porky's, right? Porky's
Yes.
is looked down upon by so many people, but Porky's is dealing with themes of anti-Semitism. It's dealing with racism, and it was funny as hell. You know, this is not about Porky's, but the scene with Porky's where I don't even know who the character's name is. So he's having sex with Kim Cattrall in the stairwell, and she's got the nickname Lassie, and then they're all on the gym floor, and you're hearing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, that is. Porky's has two of the funniest scenes you've ever seen in your life. And the other one was the shower sequence, which
Yes.
everybody knows. It's referenced on the poster as well. So say what you will about Porky's, that it's crude, that it's the ultimate sick male gaze, whatever. It is funny. And I'm sorry, if I'm to be condemned for thinking that movie's funny, fuck you. You know, I treat women with respect. You know, I love women. I love to see women elevated in life. I can still enjoy Porky's. I can still enjoy Risky Business. I can still enjoy Animal House. You
No, but it's just
know,
funny to me again that today in the West, a movie like Risky Business would be considered offensive or sexist.
completely,
Yet the
completely.
same people who would be leveling those criticisms would be likely the supporters of jihadists, which makes, of
Absolutely.
course, no sense. And that's the
Absolutely.
schizophrenia of our current,
Yeah.
time,
Well,
I guess you
we
call
don't
it.
have to accept it. I mean, one of the
No,
reasons
we
we're
don't.
doing this podcast is because we want to call out this insanity.
That's
And I
right.
think people are too fearful to go up against the mob because it'll be like, well, you won't ever be able to make another movie again because all the young actresses in this town or actresses are super woke, so they won't want to do your movie if they hear your opinions. I'm going bullshit. They would love to be in these movies. Maybe a couple of them will have a stick up their ass, but believe me, when I talk to people privately, they all want to go back to these movies. They want to see these movies again. And
That's
there's a
right.
way to do these movies that isn't, I would say, how can you put it, sexist or insulting? It's equal opportunity offenders, right? You can do
Yes.
these kind of movies that make as much fun of men as does of women, or I
Yeah,
mean,
and it's not as if in any of these films, and specifically Risky Business, since that's the topic of our episode, that the men do not get punished. They all get
it's
punished in
not
one
even
way or
about
another.
punishment. It's about their movies. We need to bring back movies where women enjoy sex.
Yep, that also.
And women do enjoy sex, and women do enjoy being on the hunt for hot men. And this whole idea that it's
Yeah.
this one-sided flirtation or one-sided quest to get laid, there are movies out there where women are like,
But also, it's not healthy for society to bury all this stuff beneath the surface because then you get real psychological issues in the
well,
society,
you
right?
get
You get
incels.
and other things, serial killers, whatever. It depends on how Freudian you want to be about all of this. But the thing
So
is,
we need to draw the direct line between these movies not being made anymore and serial killers. I think
we
that's the
do.
thesis we're making today,
We
and we
actually
would
could make a
like.
satirical movie about this. You could. That would be like the ultimate sort of
I
21st century slasher movie.
somewhere along the lines in the mid to late 2000s, somebody put out the theory or the dictate that women being naked on screen was a bad thing, especially if men were directing it. And suddenly the human body is something to be ashamed of. And if you're seeing it, it's other than being in a concentration camp or something, it's exploitation. And we need to get back to the notion that seeing meaningful sex scenes, because again, when you come back to Risky Business, there's not a scene in that movie that I feel is exploitative. And the
No, but also
sex scenes in that movie are moving the movie forward. They are establishing character, they're establishing tone. And there are movies, I will concede there are many movies made in that period in the 90s where they were pure exploitation films just about getting people naked and bobbing around and all that. But those are not the movies I'm talking about.
but even those have, you could argue, a social function that's positive
There's
for
nothing
reasons that
negative
we just
about
discussed
them.
before. Exactly. So my point is we have become bizarre Victorians now who are ashamed of sexuality in ways that we haven't seen for a long time, at least in the West. But then beyond that, I have a satirical question, which is, and it's directed at women. Don't you want to know what men are thinking? Like, in other words, it's not a good idea to not know what men think. Like, do you see what I mean? Like, no one, I'm surprised they don't seem to talk about this more, but it's like here, if it's like, if you want to know what the average red-blooded American male or any young man for that matter thinks in private about sex or the sexual fantasy that they may have, you can watch Risky Business and you're going to learn a lot. You don't want to know about that? You want to just pretend that life isn't the way it is? Is that a wise decision? I don't think it's wise. Part of the function of art, it's not the only thing art does, of course, is it comments on what humans do, right?
Well,
Art is a mirror held up to
I, I
humanity.
I agree with you that movies should show that, but I will also play devil's advocate and say every woman knows exactly what a man's thinking. They don't need a movie to tell them that. But
Well,
it could all
maybe,
be
yeah.
in good-natured fun to share in that. Because let's face it, you can cage a man in a way where you forcefully repress his behavior and a male's natural sexual drive or whatever it is, but you're not really changing it. You're just painting a facade of respectability on it. It's not going away. In fact, like you said, I think it's more dangerous because the ones who are forced into sneaking out and engaging in transgressive behavior because it's deemed transgressive when it should just be normal, even the notion, even this idea of prostitution being illegal across most of the country, whereas in certain little areas like Las Vegas, you can go and do it legally or other pockets about it, I think is nonsense. I think if more men could legally go to prostitutes and get off, there would be healthier and better people to be around because they're not walking around in complete frustration. They're not logging on to these bizarre porn sites and throwing their money there or throwing their money away on OnlyFans. And there are a lot of people in the world, older men, widowed men, people with disabilities who need to still have sex or have their needs met. And going to prostitutes should not be shameful for them.
I agree. And also, there were times in the history of the West where, especially among certain upper classes, they would take young men to lose their virginity at a prostitute.
Not even very long ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends like which country we're talking about specifically, I guess. But I mean, but I agree with you, correct. So my point is, I think people just don't know enough about their own country's histories. And so they develop this ahistorical dream cosmos and then they get lost in it.
Well, we allow certain voices in mass media, the voices professing to be the voices of morality, to determine what is acceptable or not, and it leaks over into the film business. And granted, you can be in a movie theater watching a movie like, let's say, The Dreamers and feel very uncomfortable watching it next to somebody or some.
But that's human.
It's human, but your
that's supposed to
attention,
be.
your attention's supposed to be on the fucking movie screen, not on whoever's watching it around you or your embarrassment. But you're an adult. I think
But you
adults.
should, but embarrassment is an important thing to experience. In other words, and by the way, when I first watched Risky Business, when I was in my single digits, it was a preview of what I would have to look forward to in my own life. No, but the point is, like, I watched The Graduate, Risky Business, and American Beauty when I was in my single digits. And by the way, as a kid, when you watch a movie like The Graduate or Risky Business or American Beauty, and you don't understand sex in any real meaningful way, you do respond to sort of the loss of innocence aspect of all these movies, right? You respond to the mournful
Yeah.
aspects of them. Now, you may not have ever had that because you were older by the time you saw any of
Oh,
them,
wait a minute.
right?
I grew up in a country where you couldn't even get a Playboy. And I collected a lot of these movies on pirated VHS because they had to be smuggled into the country. So unlike you could just walk down to the movie theater or go
Or
with
see it
your
on
parents
television.
or go by yourself to a VHS store, I had to engage in underworld criminality to even get my hands on these movies. And I'll tell you a funny story. In the 70s, my parents would travel outside of the borders of South Africa to these independent African countries like Swaziland or Maseru or whatever these places were, because they knew they could go to casinos there and they could go to movie theaters that showed these movies uncut. And then they could also go to bookstores and buy Playboy magazines and novels like Emmanuel and other racy banned novels. And then they would smuggle them back because they drive across the border. They weren't flying anywhere. And then they would smuggle them back into the country. And every time my parents went on these trips and they would come back, I knew they were bringing these books and magazines. And my dad would hide them at the top of the cupboard. But I knew that. And I would get in there and I would climb up and I would be on the hunt for them because at 13,
Yeah.
14 years old, I was interested in this stuff already. And I was fascinated. And it got to the point where, because they went on a couple of trips, and it got to the point when they, during the last trips, when they came back, my mother would just open the suitcase and go, "Here are the books."
That's pretty funny.
My take on it is, hey, at least your son was reading, you know?
Yeah, well, actually, I was about to say before you just mentioned it, Playboy magazine used to be extremely literary, meaning
Yeah, absolutely.
great works of literature
All the best
appeared
writers.
for the first time. That's correct. Many great works of literature appeared for the first time in Playboy magazine. Things that you wouldn't even expect, like, for example, short stories by Isaac Bashevis Singer, the Yiddish-speaking Nobel laureate. Or, for example, the short story The Fly. It was originally published in Playboy, of all things. So it's amazing to think that there was a time when a magazine that is considered to be pornography actually had high culture embedded in it. Whereas today, we don't really have high culture anywhere, including the universities, which is amazing.
Nor do you really, outside of going to sex shops, and I don't even know where those are anymore, see magazines on the rack like Playboy or Penthouse or whatever. There was a whole culture where you could just walk up to a newspaper stand and just grab those magazines or go into 7-Eleven and get those magazines. I don't think they're on sale anymore. Do they even publish Playboy as a magazine, as a hard copy magazine anymore? I'm not even sure if they do.
Well, it's not what it used to be, put it that way. They might do like specialty issues or something, but
we're definitely living in very asexual times, and it's hurt our children. Our teenagers and Gen Z and millennials have a very bizarre relationship to sex and
to everything for that
matter. And it's weirdly very androgynous too, you know.
Yeah.
I don't quite know what to make of it.
Oh, actually, speaking of which, I miss the times where you could see movies where people wore clothes that were, let's say, specific, traditionally speaking, to their gender. It actually, in some ways, amplified the sexual chemistry between the characters.
Or it was done
even in Risky Business, you see this. Even in Risky Business.
Yeah. Or take 9.5 Weeks, for example, if Kim Basinger is dressing up in a man's suit or something, it's done in a very erotic kind of way where, again, it's about enhancing the sexuality of the sequence. But I know what you're saying. There were clothes that in the 80s and 90s, let's not talk about men because we are men, but women dressed to be sexy. And today, everybody's hiding it. Although if you come to, I'm not going to name the neighborhood I live in LA, but it's gone back to being very short mini skirts and boots and showing a lot of legs and cleavage. So I think that's a positive thing. But I think that's a tiny little enclave in LA. I don't think it really speaks for the larger country. But then again, there is this tug and pull between the Madonna whore complex, right? And I feel like we're seeing this with these generations because I think they are very confused. So while they may be dressing quite sluttily, they very much don't feel like they're projecting any kind of sex vibe. So I'm going to walk down the street and I'm going to have my miniskirt up to my crotch, but God forbid you look at me. You know, it's very confusing.
Have you ever seen the movie Go?
I love Go. Yeah, for
Yeah, I
sure.
love it too. So the scene where they go to the strip club and they're not allowed to touch
Yeah.
the strippers, like that sort of
Well,
to me is a met.
don't even get me started on strip club scenes because they don't even shoot scenes in strip clubs anymore where the strippers are nude. They're all wearing fucking halter tops or whatever it is. I mean, I don't know what
winter coats.
I remember when I made Running Scared, and this was already starting back then. I said, I'm making sure that my strippers are going to be nude because it's so stupid. It's so, obviously it's to do with certain lead actresses not wanting to take their clothes off. But I mean, that's why I respect Nora so much as a movie, is because while Nora has a lot of complexity and a huge amount of heart to it, and it's a quality movie, it's an art movie, it's a commercial movie, it's all of those things. When you see them in a strip club, they're naked. And Sean Baker understands that. He's not condescending to us. Then you see like Robert Rodriguez's Sin City, and it's Jessica Alba, and she's in a strip club and she's wearing like a leather bra and panties. I don't want to go to a strip club. I don't go to strip clubs actually, but I wouldn't want to go to a strip club and spend my good money to watch somebody not get naked. What's the point of it? And then they start that thing. I think it also started in Sin City maybe, where they paint out Jessica Alba's, she's wearing obviously some kind of covering, and they paint it out and then they paint nipples onto or something. They create this fake post-production nudity, which always feels so weird and phony. If you don't want to show a strip club scene, don't shoot in a fucking strip club. But I agree. If you take an audience in there, be prepared to show some of that stuff. And it was quite surprising in the last season of Euphoria, when they had strip club scenes, very little nudity shown, even in Euphoria, which I thought was
that's odd
because
they have nudity everywhere else.
Yeah, because Sam Levinson hasn't been shy about showing nudity. They did a little bit of it, but most of it was just trying to sort of cover it up.
But I want to just go back for a moment to Go, because the reason I mentioned that scene and the absurdity of that scene, I mean, it's intended to be hilarious, right? Like it's an absurdist moment, you could call it. Like look but don't touch, right? So the thing is, that sums up our society today, our Western society. It's this schizophrenic attitude, right?
It is. But in a strip club, the buy-in is look but don't touch. I think you're a bit of an asshole if you're going to cross that line, or you should be looking for something else. But I get the metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I'm talking about metaphorically. Of course. I'm not talking about literally. Like there is something absurd about the whole construct of a strip club in that sense, if you can follow.
But this is the thing I'm saying is younger audiences today, when they see these scenes, I don't think they know how to process them. They find themselves feeling uncomfortable in them, and then they're vocalize it as we don't want to see them. Or if you go on a message board and read about a certain movie, go, I really loved the movie, but I didn't need the strip club scene, or I didn't need this sex scene, I didn't need that. They have done a really good job on this generation of convincing them that sex on film is bad, unless it's gay sex.
And that terrorists are good, and that in Aladdin, with the cartoon version, it's offensive to point out, even satirically, that in medieval Arabic lands, there were atrocities committed, right? Because that is offensive. It's just reality.
But everything is offensive today. So I think we just have to assume going in, somebody's going to be offended. Make the movie you want to make if somebody will allow you to make the movie you want to make. I want to bring back I don't say it's on me to bring it back, but I would have no problem bringing back the erotic crime film like Body Heat. Or I'm probably not going to go out and make, at my age, a teenage sex film or whatever that is. I may watch it, I may not. But I do want to see adults engaged in sexuality on film. And again, I stress this in ways that move the film forward, in ways that are endemic to the character and not just plugged in there. Because I don't want to see
gratuitous stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Gratuitous is you kind of feel it, you know it when you see it. But having realistic sex, when we talked about The Dreamers or Lost Tango, any number of these movies, including Risky Business, I don't believe there's anything gratuitous about anything in these movies.
No, I don't either.
And
although it's not necessarily a bad thing either to sometimes be gratuitous, because it's a healthy thing to do. Art is the ultimate safe space.
Yes, but I do think a gratuitous movie should announce itself as being just that. And that's not very far from,
too, right?
For example, I don't think there's anything wrong with pornography. And I
No.
like some of the older pornographic movies because they actually put effort into the filmmaking in it, and the women were incredibly sexy. And one of the worst things of pornography today, which I just don't watch contemporary pornography, is because there is such poor craftsmanship to the whole thing that I find it a turnoff. Whereas watching, let's say, a movie from the 70s with Annette Haven or whoever made those movies, again, I always go back to the opening of Misty Beethoven or The Devil and Miss Jones. They were well-made movies for what they were. And sure, you got the benefit of the sex that was on screen and the horniness of it all, but you also got to get inside a film that was doing it all. And at one point in the 70s, when porno chic was at its strongest point, people really thought there was going to be a convergence of the mainstream erotic drama or erotic thriller with pornography.
Well, in
And
some ways, Risky Business is the ultimate parody of porno chic. It's the most sophisticated, comprehensively sophisticated parody or satire of porno chic
well,
you could make.
the thing about Risky Business is while on some level it's an erotic film, there's no denying it. Rebecca De Mornay was gorgeous. I think the movie, you sail through that movie where everybody is very blasé about the sex. The
Yep.
movie doesn't announce itself like, oh, and now we're going to have a sex scene. Here's the big lead up to the sex scene. The sexual attitudes in Risky Business are so mundane. The prostitutes are very businesslike about it. There is no embarrassment or shame about what
Well,
anybody's doing.
except for the initial encounter with Lana, even when he's embarrassed and hiding his identity
But
while
that's
speaking on the
because he
phone.
hasn't evolved into
That's
the
right. But by
more
the way, I think that
normal mindset.
correct. But that sequence I just described is one of the greatest I've ever seen in any film to communicate issues related to sexual guilt. I think it's so well done.
Yeah.
Psychologically, aesthetically, the pacing of it, everything. And it is exciting at the same time. That sequence it has so many emotions
Well,
embedded
even
in it.
when Tom Cruise comes home and he finds the Raphael Sabaj character coming out of the house, and he's immediately jealous that he might have been with Lana, even though Lana's a prostitute. So,
Yeah, that's right. And
so
and
Tom
that
Cruise
speaking
is
of which,
he's forming this connection with her. And part of what keeps the movie off balance for me is, does Lana feel the same way about Joel? Because you don't have this sort of erotic love story or this erotic coming of age story where there's such cynicism to it all, where we don't know where one of the characters is coming from. And even by the end of the movie, I still am unsettled by Rebecca De Mornay's character because I wouldn't trust her
of course not.
to,
But the
I
thing
wouldn't,
is,
no, I mean,
that's
I don't mean just I wouldn't trust her to rob my house. I wouldn't trust her with my emotions. I wouldn't,
no, I agree. But the thing is, that's part of the Salingerian aspect of the film because The Catcher in the Rye is all about phonies. And this movie is also about phonies. Even when it comes to the scene where Joel asks his friends if they actually want to do something meaningful with their lives or they just want to make money, and
yeah.
they all, without hesitation, say just they want to make money.
But that means they're
Um,
not phonies. They're just being honest about who they are.
no, in that they're honest about being phonies
Yeah.
because they don't have any higher
I don't even
ambitions.
think they are
They're
phonies.
super fit.
I mean, the rest of the world are being phonies about it, but I love that they all just admit to it. I don't even think there's a pretense with them. Nor
No, but
with
what I meant
Joel's
was,
friends. They're all about let's get laid and make money. There is
but so in
anything.
other words, there's superficiality though, because here's the thing though, living a life devoted to that level of superficiality will usually not end well. So in that respect, they're phonies.
Well, I think
Um,
that's a matter of opinion if it won't end well, but also understand the background they're coming from. They're all coming from well-to-do families, so they don't have the challenges in life that Lana has and her fellow prostitutes. And that is one of the reasons why Lana has a distance between her and Joel and some of these others, where she's looking at them going, you've got it made. You live in this beautiful house. Your parents take care of you. They love you. You're set up to go to all these great schools. I didn't have that, but I have something you want that you need from me.
well, that's another reason though that they are phony. because they're living in a dream world, an artificial world.
But
Now,
it's
the other
not
thing
their
too,
fault. I mean, they
oh, I
just
didn't say it's
been
their
brought
fault
up in a
necessarily.
certain way. But it is a coming of age movie. So by the end of the movie, Joel isn't the same Joel who calls Lana up on the phone. Joel has been taught the way of the world and has enormous respect for what Lana has and even Guido has brought into his life. And I love that when the name Guido, that's such a derogatory name in the first place, right? Is that what his name was, the character, Guido, or was that the name that Curtis Armstrong assigned to him? I think his name really was, yeah, in the credits, his name really is Guido. Guido the Killer Pimp, who wasn't a killer at all. He was actually quite a nice guy. Guido's maybe the most principled guy in the whole movie, if you really look at it.
Maybe. But the other thing too is this movie does a great job of showing honest depictions of selfishness. So like for example, when Joel's friends come over to use his
Yeah.
parents' home to have sex, like that's such a great moment because it's in many ways so truthful and probably a lot of people can relate to similar instances in their own lives. And just, it's rare to see a moment like that. It's rare to see a moment
Well, also
in
there's
any movie like
there's
that.
close friendships that they all shared where you could just knock on the door and say, "Can I have sex with my girlfriend in the upstairs bedroom?" And you'd be like, "Okay, go ahead." And then you even leave the house because they're so noisy. Which
Yeah, of
brings
course,
which
but
brings
he
us.
doesn't appreciate it. Joel doesn't appreciate it.
No, at first he's okay doing it, but Joel doesn't kick them out of the house. He leaves. So he's a good guy. I wanted to talk about, since we're there, like there are some very interesting supporting roles in the movie with actors who went on to have bigger careers like Bronson Pinchot and Kevin
Hmm.
Anderson and Curtis Armstrong. But Kevin Anderson had a moment in the early 90s as a leading man and sort of peters out. But he was in Sleeping with the Enemy, wasn't he? The Julia Roberts movie. Was he the boyfriend that she meets after she runs away from her husband? I think he was in that movie. I'll have to check the credits. But he was in another movie, a Mike Figgis movie that I like very much called Liebestraum. Did you ever see that?
Yes.
And
And
then,
he was in you're talking about the 1991 movie.
yeah, there's only
Yeah,
been
he was
one
in it. Yeah, he was
Sleeping with
in
the
it.
Enemy. Yeah. At that point, he was being groomed to be like the next leading man. I think he had more indie sensibility and maybe just felt more comfortable doing those kind of movies. And then I love the scene with Bronson Pinchot where he's letting all the prostitutes into the house at the door and the piece of music that's playing over it, which is such a great piece of music for the sequence. But a lot of
Oh,
that is
Muddy Waters, Muddy
yeah,
Waters.
yeah. And a lot of that was improv on Bronson Pinchot's part, the way each time the door opens. And there's at one point one prostitute who's much taller than him, like walks past and he's just staring at her cleavage. But he does it in such a off the wall, subtle kind of way. It's such a lovable movie. I don't know anybody who couldn't love this movie. And it's so,
It is a lovable movie.
and at the end of the day, it's so damn entertaining. It's substantive. It's erotic. It's all the things you want from a movie of this genre. And so shocking that these movies aren't being made anymore. And I will rack my brain to try come up with a movie similar to this movie being made today, other than Anora. I would say Anora shares certain sensibilities with this movie, but
Well, thematically.
and also in terms of it's a little bit reverse in terms of the character
Well,
because
even to the extent that the prostitute teaches her eventual boyfriend how to have sex properly, essentially.
it's
So in
about a
that sense,
woman. She's definitely not as manipulative as Rebecca De Mornay's character, Mikey Madison's character. She's more naive. She's looking for the fairy tale payoff in her life. So she enters into it in a very naive way. But she is on the make for it. She is working as a stripper slash prostitute. She does get involved in a guy. It happens to be from a Russian oligarch family. There is a certain naivete to this kid who, when you first meet him, you think, oh, he's kind of a cool kid. Then you realize he's a piece of shit. Unlike Joel, who turns out to be a good guy. But in terms of the Pretty Woman-esque kind of themes that a lot of these movies convey, what I love about Risky Business is it's still the most cynical of it. And it's not heading for a happily ever after ending. That was never Paul Brickman's intention with this movie. Whereas the other two, I feel, are more on the track for that, even if Mikey Madison ends up with a different guy in there.
yes. Well, I far prefer Risky Business to Honora for many reasons, even aesthetically. But
Oh, way more
uh,
aesthetically. But it's still, Honora's a really good movie. From my point of view, I loved Honora. And it was a breath of fresh air in this climate. And I'm glad Honora got made because Honora goes against the grain that they don't make these movies anymore. Well, Sean Baker had to make it with a no-name cast on a very limited budget. He certainly wasn't making it with the equivalent budget of what Risky Business was for back, you take Risky Business's budget from back then and transpose it on today. Risky Business is probably a $30 million movie.
do you think, though, that Honora shows sex as being fun the way that
At
Risky
some
Business does
point,
at times?
when she's first with him at his house and they seem to be having a good time, I don't think the issue with Honora is that the sex isn't fun when it's on screen.
The film feels sterile to me for a number of reasons, but that's just me. I mean, obviously, it's hyper subjective.
Well, this is what was so unique about Risky Business. It's very hard to show sex with a prostitute on screen and make it feel meaningful, right? Because it's a transaction. So it's not like the scene where Tom Cruise finally has sex with Lee Thompson and how heartfelt and emotional it feels in All the Right Moves. And by the way, do you remember a movie from, I think it was the 80s with Aidan Quinn called Reckless and Daryl Hannah? That's another one of these movies.
Yeah, I saw that.
I think that is a really, really good film, and I'd love to see that again or it come out on a 4K because, again, in this case, it was the guy came from a working class background who gets involved with a beautiful rich girl and how he doesn't fit into her life. And we see variations on that, like Risky Business is the flip side. And these were great movies. And that's another sexy movie. It has so many really good sex scenes in it, like the pool house sequence. And definitely a movie.
The difference also is, and we said this before in other episodes of our podcast, in the 21st century, especially by, let's say, 2010, movies that do depict sex, even if they're brave enough to do that, they end up often becoming science fiction in the sense that we are examining the human participants
Yeah.
in a petri dish,
Yeah.
as opposed to creating a erotic or sensual aura around the characters. And that doesn't mean that they have to be boyfriend and girlfriend or have meaningful sexual relations. It just means that you have to have an erotic presentation,
Well,
which you see in Risky Business or in Reckless or any
we're
other
definitely
movies that you
living in an
mentioned.
era where sex is happening off screen. The prelude to sex happens on screen, but very little of it then takes the camera into the bedroom.
Yes.
And we've talked in the past about all the reasons why that's happening. It's changing
Yes.
attitudes with the actresses, it's their agents, it's the pushback from repressed people and all of that. I wanted to talk also quickly about the cinematographers. There were two cinematographers on this film, Bruce Surtees and Reynaldo Villalobos. And I'm not quite sure what happened there because, again, there's different accounts on the internet. But apparently Bruce Surtees was shooting the movie too dark for...
By the way, his father was the great cinematographer Robert Surtees, who shot The Graduate, which I just mentioned not that long ago. And that's interesting.
Yeah, because I thought Risky Business was beautifully shot from all
it is.
styles and feels of it. So apparently Bruce Surtees was shooting it a little too dark, is the sort of what I'm reading out there. And Paul Brickman wanted a more colorful vibe to the film, especially in the daylight sequences. And somehow they end up with two cinematographers, one either taking over from the other, or I don't know. I highly doubt they were shooting on the movie at the same time. But what's interesting is then Paul Brickman went on and used Bruce Surtees for Men Don't Leave. So I don't know if I believe that story about him not appreciating what Bruce Surtees was doing. It's very confusing to me. I'd like to get to the bottom of that.
It's a mystery, that's for sure. But no, I think whoever did the cinematography, it's great. Very expressionistic also.
And Bruce Surtees, by the way, shot Night Moves, one of my favorite movies.
Yes.
And did a great job with that.
Oh, another thing I want to mention is 1983, the year that Risky Business came out, was a great year for film in general, but it was also a great year specifically for highly original satires on American issues. So you had The Right Stuff, which is a highly original, epic satire on Americana, you could say, but it's also an endearing satire. So it's like a tribute to and satire of Americana. Yeah. Then you also have Scarface, which we discussed in one of our previous episodes. And that's also a satire specifically on Reaganite culture. push it to the limit, right?
Yep.
And you see an overlap. Also, the other overlap between Scarface and Risky Business is that they are both sleazy movies in many ways,
With
but
electronic
they
scores.
with poetic electronic
Yeah.
scores. Giorgio Moroder is maybe the ultimate. He
Phenomenal.
may be
Phenomenal.
the poet laureate of electronic music in film.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone comes close. I was watching Flashdance the other night and I forgot he did the score to that as well.
And that was the same year, by the
And a
way.
bunch of the same songs and pure sex on screen, not in a
Yes.
flashy way. I mean, there's some nudity in the strip club, has a strip club with nudity, but just sexual attitudes. People were sexy. They were
Yes.
into sex. The big problem with Flashdance for me is, especially now you watch it in 4K, they don't even try and hide the fact that it's not Jennifer Beals dancing in the big audition sequence. It's just pulls you out of the movie in the worst
So
way.
watch your DVD version.
Yeah, I think I may have to go back to VHS on it, but I still love the movie. I
there
still
you go.
enjoy the movie because how can you not enjoy Adrian Lyne's directing any street sequences? But I think
And the
we
music.
should. I think we should finish up now because we've been going for a while. And Risky Business. I mean, what more needs to be said about it? We both love this movie. I would love to see more films getting made in the style and tone and that have this sort of unsettling but
And its originality.
dreamy quality, eccentric, as you would say, since we haven't used the word this podcast. I would say it's
I'm glad you inserted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good you squeezed it in there because, yeah, I agree. It is an eccentric film in all sorts of ways. The surreal aspects of the film alone, especially by today's standards.
And I think that's all to do with Paul Brickman. He's obviously, even when you hear him talk on a commentary, he is a very sort of soft-spoken, eccentric kind of guy. And I'm glad he made this one. And people should check out Men Don't Leave because it's a very good film as well.
It is. But also, I want people to think of Risky Business as a great, highly original, sophisticated film because often it is sort of mislabeled or misunderstood as just a very simple, if not simplistic,
I think Risky
comedy.
Business,
and I don't think it's that at all. I think it's a profound
I think they do think of it in that way today, especially because it's part of the Criterion collection. I don't know many teenage sex comedy dramas that Criterion has inducted into the collection. So clearly there's a thinking that Risky Business is a quality art house film as well as it's a commercial comedy drama. And why don't we leave it at that?
That's good then.
Yeah. Go see Risky Business if you haven't, or go see it again. It will hold up, I assure you. And we'll be back real soon with another Forbidden Films podcast.
Amen.